Good evening, Ashland community, and all of those who are joining me this evening on the webinar about the fall reopening of the Ashland Public Schools. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule on a beautiful evening, one of the best nights we've had this summer in terms of the weather and the ability to get out and walk around. But that being said, I have a lot to cover in hour and a half, 2 hours. But I want to set some ground rules for us so we're clear as to the expectations that I have and what I can expect of you. Two things. One, well, maybe a couple of things. WACA-TV is recording this. It's actually being live right now on the education channels, but we'll also have the link to post it later. So if you have to jump off later during the evening, it'll be made available hopefully in the next few days. Secondly, there's a Q&A session. If you want to ask questions, please feel free to write a question in there as we go along. The first piece will be me just giving a highlight overview of where we are today and where the state has landed on certain things and where Ashland is and how we're moving forward. The second piece is a number of folks did submit questions ahead of time, which I will read those and go through those. And quite often, those questions are questions that are probably in your head and that you may decide to write in the Q&A. You have the ability, if you write a question, there'll be a thumbs up sign. And if you want to, if you see a question that you really would like to move to the top of the list, just hit the thumbs up and that question will continue to move up the ladder. So we're sure that we get an opportunity to answer those questions. And other than that, it's going to be pretty straightforward, in terms of me just presenting information and go from there. But again, I thank you for taking the opportunity to come in tonight and listen and just see where we are. It's July 16, and there's still a lot to be done. And there has been a lot already done. So I'm happy to share with you where we are. So let me start. I don't want to say at the beginning because that would put us back to March 12th, and I don't think we want to go back and revisit March 12th through June 18th at this point in time. We want to think and move forward and decide how we're going to get the Ashland Public Schools up and running and do what's best for our kids and our faculty, staff, in our community. And I will preface all of the comments I'm about to make with the one understanding that the decisions that we make as a school district and that I will propose through the school committee is one of understanding that COVID and the coronavirus is and will continue to be the center of our discussion about health and well-being, and making sure that we fully understand this is a health issue. And however we open our schools, we will focus on, first and foremost, the health and well-being of our kids, our faculty, our staff, and all the community members who come into our buildings and use our facilities and work in those facilities. I think it's important that you understand that that alone will be the key driver of all decision making. So let me start with June 25th. I did share with the community that on June 25th, the Commissioner of Education, Jeff Riley, shared his initial guidance with the state of Massachusetts and all school districts around the Commonwealth. And what that guidance stated was a few things had to occur in the next month. And by the next month, I mean through the first week of August. One, he indicated that there would be 3 plans that the school districts had to investigate as part of a feasibility study. And what he meant was we needed to go in and look at all of our classrooms to see if we could actually indeed get all of our students in the buildings physically. So if we were to go to an in-person learning environment completely, can we do that? And one of the pieces of information that he wanted us to consider and in the guidelines was they adjusted the physical distancing requirement from the CDC's 6 feet to 3 to 6 feet, with 6 being the desired preferable, but with 3 feet being the minimum that school districts could could set desks and physically distance students from one another. I will start and be very upfront with you that I will not be proposing to the school committee that we even consider a 3-foot model. I think the 6-foot model is our minimum where we begin. And that in turn does create some issues with regard to modeling. But that's what I firmly believe, that just because we can go to 3 feet, it's not the right thing to do. But that's a quick aside. The second piece was a hybrid model. So in a hybrid model is a combination of in-person learning as well as remote learning. And the third model was a purely remote model of learning, and which is, I don't want to say it would be identical to the spring, because it absolutely will not even resemble what the spring looked like in the Ashland Public Schools. It will be a robust, curriculum-driven, assessment-driven, teacher-driven, more synchronous learning, so in-person learning across the board. We recognize that. We know that inevitably we will probably get to that point. If the numbers do rise again, we will need to find a way to ensure that our remote learning is robust. So those are the 3 pieces of the puzzle that by July 31st, I need to present to the Department of Education. 1, can we physically get all of our kids in the school? And if so, how would we do that? And I can tell you we can. We have set up the classrooms. We can do it. I'm not going to propose that we do it, but to answer the question of the Department of Ed, the answer is yes, we can. And we can do it with the guidelines of 3 feet. I will continually repeat, that is not going to be my recommendation. And then we've had each building as a working group where they've got to figure out in their buildings specifically, what does it look like to physically distance 6 feet in the classroom? What does it look like to walk in the hallways, to have one-way hallways, to get to a cafeteria, to use the restrooms, nursing, counseling offices? All of those things are very building specific because our buildings are built differently. So we have 5 working groups within the buildings who will have much more specific information coming out in the next 2 weeks as to what it's going to look like. And that includes a schedule and how that schedule potentially could be used. And one of the other pieces that I think is critically important coming out of the guidance is the requirement of face masks. And within the guidance, the Department of Ed has said it is a mandate that all grades 2 through 12 will be required to wear face masks. All students and all adults will be required to wear face masks. I believe in going one step further and saying pre-K through 12 should be wearing face masks. And within the Ashland Public Schools, that will be my recommendation. Now, that being said, I do understand there will be medical complications with adults as well as some children. And those are exceptions, and we will deal with those exceptions as we move along. But it will certainly be my recommendation that pre-K through 12, not just 2 through 12, utilizes either a face mask or facial coverings, et cetera. So then on July 31st, I have to present this initial feasibility study. And after that is presented, I've got a real quick 10-day turnaround. So on August 10th, we are required, and we were just told this yesterday from the state level, that we must finalize our plan. We must be able to distribute to our community as well as to the state exactly what we intend to do for our schooling for the fall of 2020. I will tell you it's going to be a monumental task in order to get this done, in order to think of all of the protocols and processes that must occur. And that includes what happens if a student comes or an adult is identified as having COVID-19 or potential symptoms. How do we treat that within the building or the district or the town? Those are all questions I wish I could just sit here and answer for you, explicitly. I can't do that at this time. I'm not going to give you information that I'm just going to make up. Our nursing staff, the Board of Health, the Department of Public Health, they will help guide those decisions, and that will be part of that August 10th package that we will submit to the Department of Education. So in the end, there are two pieces that have to occur. We've got to get this information out, but there's a lot of work that has to be done with our teachers unions, our custodial unions, our paraprofessionals, our nurses, our administrative assistants. As you know, working conditions are going to be changing, and we have to make sure that we're involving all of our educators and support staff in that decision-making process. It's going to be an interesting 4 weeks, that's for sure. So that being said, what I should have asked first was, if you could just raise your hand to make sure everyone's hearing me okay. Just a few of you so I can identify. I should have asked this at the beginning. I'm sure someone would have written a question and said, no, we can't hear you, but beautiful, thank you. I'm gonna lower all the hands because I believe we are good. So I'm gonna start with reading the questions that were submitted online, answering those, and then go into the Q&A session and answering questions that may not be answered. And I apologize every once in a while for stopping to take a sip to get my voice squared back away. So let me start with the first question. Can you share the preliminary findings from the survey that was sent recently regarding remote and hybrid and in-person options? I can. It was funny they asked, because I'd already printed this out and I was going to share this. So if you remember, option one was full in-person learning. We had 1,375 respondents. To put it in context, we have 2,700 students in the district, and I think we're probably, if I went back and looked at the full respondents, we're probably around 60% of the folks that attend our schools. That being said, percentage-wise, a total percentage of families who said they would send their kids back full in-person with learning safety requirements installed. It didn't get into specifics in terms of the feet, the 3 versus the 6. It just said with safety requirements. I went back and looked at the question. It was 61% of our families said full in-person learning was what they desired. Option 2, which was the hybrid, was 28%. And option 3, which was complete remote learning, was 12%. And there are some questions about the remote learning piece, which I will get into in a little bit. If families, have asked the question about, can we only do remote learning? What does that look like? How is the district going to handle that? But more fully, Ashland High School. So looking at option 1, which is the full in-person, it was 63%. Hybrid was 30%, and the remote learning was 6%, which is about 27 kids for remote learning. AMS, the middle school, 62%, 29%, and 9%. Again, I think it's interesting to look at the remote learning, which is 30 kids total. The Mendez School, 59%, 26% for hybrid learning, and 15% for remote, or 46 students. The Warren School had 56%, option 1, which is the in-person, 26 for the hybrid, and 18% for remote learning, which accounts for 54 students. The Pitaway School, 86% of this for in-person learning, and 14% for remote learning, and the hybrid learning was a 0. So interesting numbers. I think they're going to continue to change. I will be asking another survey, have another survey put out next week, most likely, dealing just with hybrid and hybrid schedules. And what does a hybrid schedule look like, and what does that mean? And from my lens, let me just give you an overview, because there are many models of hybrid learning. There can be a hybrid model where students come, 50% of the students come in. So we'll use this as an example, because 6 feet of physical distancing within the classroom typically would mean about 50% of our kids would be present at one time. That's how it's going to work. That's the only way it would work within our system, financially, as well as just physically in the buildings. So a hybrid model could mean we break kids out into two sections, two cohorts, smaller groups. And it might be done alphabetically. It might be done grade level. Those are decisions we're working out currently at the buildings. And how it could be, maybe it's a week on of in-person learning, and then the one group is in-person learning. So let's use group A for example. And then group B might be completely remote for a week. And then the following week it switches. Or it might look like 2 days of group A, a potential day of remote in between, where we can do some really deep cleaning of our building. And then on, say, Thursday and Friday, group B comes in for 2 days. So never more than 3 days are kids going to be without actually having physical contact with an educator, a teacher in a classroom. Or it could be every other day. Group A on Monday, group B on Tuesday, and it continues to float that way. So I will be sending that survey out, really trying to get feedback from the community as to what model might be best as it relates to for family purposes, and understanding that everything we do will be complex. Everything we do will be challenging for each one of you as employees in your own professions, care and childcare, the remote learning that must take place. All of that will be a challenge, and we want to make sure we just gather all that data as much as we can to make the most informed decision before we submit on August 10th. And that will also help inform our bargaining and our negotiations with our unions and what that looks like in the classrooms. So that's sort of a high level view of the hybrid piece. And it leads into the next question. Is school going to be a combination of both remote and some in person? That's the hybrid model. Some in person, and this is just a statement that the person wrote, some in person is important for the personal connection to teachers. And I would say it's all of it is important for personal connection. We want that personal connection with our students and our educators. Middle school kids need more specific instructions. I agree. I have a 7th grader going into 8th grade. He certainly needs more explicit instruction than my soon-to-be sophomore. In past meetings, you mentioned that there may be a remote option for families that may be concerned about returning to an in-person school experience. Is this still the plan? So this is a really challenging topic, but one which I think the Ashland Public Schools can rise to the occasion. When looking at the numbers of students and families who are saying, Jim, we're just hesitant right now. We're not sure we want to send our children back to school until there's a vaccine or until we feel comfortable. And so we may keep our kids home. And what does that mean? And so the options that exist for our families are two, honestly. Well, three. One is you can decide that you want to homeschool your child. And that's Mass General Law allows you to do that. There's some paperwork you would have to fill out within the curriculum office. We have to approve the plan to understand what curriculum you're using, what assessments you're using, and that you're meeting the requirements necessary for a student to progress at their specific grade level. Or one or two, I'm working towards considering creating a couple different models of remote learning for those families that want to keep their kids home. So an Ashland Public Schools online academy, if you will, where there could be a suite of opportunities. The state is looking at a platform, an online platform that we could all invest in, that is tied into the curriculum standards. It would have assessments. It's not run by Ashland Public Schools or the Ashland Public School teachers, but an outside vendor with certified teachers who are running the curriculum. That's a piece that the state's looking at. At the middle and high school, we have invested over the years, because we are a small district, in virtual high school, in companies called Edgenuity and others, where they offer courses like French 2, AP French. They're not like being in person, but they do cover the curriculum required, or the curricula required for certain subject areas. And they're graded, they're assessed, and we do count them towards our GPAs, and we count them towards our graduation requirements. And the third piece is, when I'm thinking about younger students and elementary students, we certainly have a number of educators who are in immunocompromised health situations as well. And if we've got enough educators who are willing to be trained and teach remotely 100% of the time, we could actually have a tremendously robust program for families. And we're investigating that and looking at the professional development required, as well as the technology that we need to invest in for our educators as well as our families. I can tell you that our goal will be to make sure that every child within our district has a Chromebook in their hands for the year, and that's something that we're working hard at getting done. So those are the three remote pieces. I will be, again, probably by August 10th, I will be asking families as part of our rollout to commit. Are you going to commit to only remote learning for the year or for a half a year? So we can plan for that, and we can make sure that we create the most robust educational experience online that we can for our families and our students. And that's important for us to know. So expect that to be coming through, but I do think we have a great opportunity here as well to create a fantastic remote learning experience for those families that are hesitant to send their kids back. If we return to online learning, will the activities be similar to the spring? No, they will absolutely be a lot more robust, a lot more curriculum driven, assessment driven, graded, expectations of attendance, all of those things. Now, again, I want to preface that it's certainly much harder at the elementary schools to push that type of model at folks. And I am leery of having students in front of computers for 6 hours a day. I don't think it's healthy, and we just want to be cognizant. But absolutely, in terms of the rigor of what we're doing, it will certainly be a lot more robust. Will the district consider adhering to the CDC's 6-foot social distancing recommendation rather than the less supported 3-foot recommendation offered by DESE? I started out by saying I will absolutely be recommending to the school committee that we not consider the 3-foot recommendation by the Department of Education. Will there be partitions between desks? Again, this is one of those things that we're discussing. There are partitions. There will be partitions in some areas with some students and in some classrooms, but we've been also told that the use of partitions isn't necessarily that effective, and the amount of time and effort that we're going to need to clean and disinfect said partitions outweighs much of the benefit that we might get from it. Will there be enough teachers for small classes and enough classes for the students since Mendez is already crowded? The models that we're looking at will not require us to consider or need a tremendous amount of additional staff. As you know, we're in a tough economic time in the recession, and so we need to be thinking how we can best support our students with the funding that we have. And part of the exercise of the feasibility study for the Department of Ed was to identify the additional cost that it might take to run a in-person learning environment, a full in-person learning environment. And I'll give an example. Transportation. We spend anywhere between $70,000 and $80,000 per bus per year. So we have 19 buses that we run for the district. And as you know, we have 3 runs. So a Mendez run, a middle high school run, and a run for the Warren School. Pitaway doesn't use the transportation. And if we were to consider the recommendations from the CDC in the Department of Ed at this time for transportation, we can only fit about 27 students on a bus, which normally we fit anywhere between 55 and 70. Therefore, adding buses and adding drivers, as well as monitors on those buses to ensure that students are staying physically distant as well as wearing their masks will be astronomical. It could double our cost of transportation. So we're talking about a $1.5 million increase just for transportation alone. And so that, to me, is a great concern from a financial aspect of things. And there's no relief coming from what we're hearing at the state level. So even adding staff to reduce classes, that's where the cohort models might be able to work for us in better scenarios. And depending upon how many students and families decide to keep their kids home, that will automatically reduce class sizes as well. Will there be any exceptions to the rule that kids cannot go on different buses if parents cannot be home? I will tell you, we are looking at all options with our transportation, but we are charged, and I am charging my staff with minimizing all potential unnecessary contact of students and adults. I said earlier this morning in the webinar was, what I can control is what I can control. I can control how we run our school in terms of the protocols on the buses, at cafeteria, in the classrooms, the requirement of the mask. I can control that piece of it. But what I can't control is when folks go home and students go home and they're allowed to go and have parties and pool parties and play in youth sports and things of that nature. I can't control that. And I'm not naive to think that students and families are getting together. They are. What I'm hoping is that as they get together, they're still thinking about the physical distancing and the thought that wearing masks, or if you're 6 feet apart and you're not wearing a mask, that you're just being thoughtful of how it could impact other folks. So to me, when I look at transportation and things of that nature, we want to make sure that in class sizes that we can do it within the structure of our current budget. I was wondering how pods of 10 or so students would work in the high school where kids have so many different classes. As a former high school principal, assistant principal in charge of scheduling and building schedules, I think the middle and high school especially have the hardest task, especially with a hybrid model. The hybrid model is very challenging. Especially when you're dealing with students who take 7 classes, 5 a day and drop 2 and rotate. It's very difficult. So Ms. St. Kerr and her working group, and made up of teachers, administrators, and parents, are looking through those models and understanding that we're trying to limit the number of transitions. And that will be the goal, right? So instead of having 5 or 6 transitions a day, maybe we can reduce it to 2 or 3 within the building. What is the procedure if a child gets sick? And I'm going to read, these are all connected. Will the child be kept in a separate room until the parent arrives for pickup? What happens to any students who are required to stay home for a longer period, for a 14-day quarantine, for example? Will there be a way for them to attend school remotely? How will we protect teachers, assistant teachers, custodians, support staff? I'm adding in administrators because we're there every day too. Et cetera, in cases of high-risk patients. Well, I know it's their job. It seems they have to put their health second. How can they stay protected? And what are the procedures when a teacher or staff tests positive for COVID-19? And I also had a parent email me that question tonight. And I'm not trying to avoid the question. I want to be as honest as I can be. We are looking at developing protocols and processes that fall in alignment with the Department of Public Health, the local Ashland Board of Health, the governor's mandates, the Department of Education's mandates, and our local nurses. Audrey LaCroix, who is our head nurse, is fantastic. And she has been not only part of, I meet with her every Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we discuss what are the concerns we're going to have. This topic comes up every single week. And we're trying to develop the protocols and the processes so when this occurs, but it has to be in alignment with the Ashland Board of Health, the Ashland COVID working group at the town level. So Sergeant Ed Berman, who's in charge of that. And we will take that guidance and be more explicit in August when we put our plan out. I will say we will continually look at the local data, meaning the Ashland data, but also the Metro West data, understanding that our community and our families work in different towns and are exposed to different protocols in those communities. And so when a child has COVID-like symptoms, for instance, and they come to the nurse's office, it will no longer be you just go into the nurse's office. I've talked to the nurses where they are going to meet kids outside of the general nursing area and go through the process. And our nurses have all of the proper equipment, and we've ordered $100,000 worth of equipment for our classrooms and nurses and teachers and custodial staff to ensure that they're safe. And then once something is identified, or if someone is identified as having COVID symptoms, we are creating the isolation rooms as required under the Department of Ed's initial guidance. We have taken away 2 principals' offices, one at Pitaway. Sarah has lost her office, and Pete Regan has lost his office in those 2 schools to create isolation rooms. And so we're ripping out carpets and putting down tile, appropriate flooring and putting in proper ventilation. So those are all things that are occurring right now. But the procedures will be more heavily outlined in the August update to families. But we will always err on the side of caution. I think if you go back to March 12th, I know we certainly took some heat as a school district when I shut down the schools initially out of what I considered was the right move from a public health standpoint. And now looking back on it, it certainly was the right move. So we'll certainly take the health and safety and well-being of our students, our families, and our faculty and staff will always be the first and foremost thing. Will there be outdoor education opportunities? Yes. We're looking at potentially, renting and leasing tents so we can have not only the opportunity maybe to eat outside, but to have classrooms outside. We are going to have mandatory mask breaks throughout the day, significant time for students to take the mask off, to get out and physically distance away from one another, but to get the mask off, to breathe some fresh air. The building principals are incorporating those things into their plans. How often are air filters and ventilation systems? And I can tell you, I've met with our custodial maintenance staff as late as this morning, and we've talked a lot about all of our filtration systems, our HVAC plans, what's the maintenance been on them. We're changing our filters on a quarterly basis within the classrooms. Last year and the year before that, we've really worked with our faculty and staff not to pile books and other things on our ventilators in the rooms, especially in the Warren School or the Mendez School, where over years you accumulate things and you just put them on the heating systems and you forget about the air exchange that needs to occur. And so we've made a concerted effort to ensure that the airflow is better and of higher quality. Right now, I know our maintenance staff has been going on all of the roof to look at our roofing ventilators and our units to ensure that they're working at the highest capacity. And the filter systems are being looked at from a level of, will they filter the air and any of the virus and the droplets that come through the air? How does that, how are our filters catching that? So we do have some older systems, and we're trying to maximize the efficiency of those systems. I think, again, I have asked today, I asked Joe Richardson and John Murray, who are our custodial and facilities individuals, to make sure that they have written out very explicit instructions as to how we're going to circulate air, the classrooms, the cafeteria areas, the highly touched areas. So that will be very explicit as well within our plan that will be distributed again August 10th. Much of the country is still seeing so much COVID. How do we know someone won't bring it to this area? That was one of the questions. I don't know. I can't. Listen, as we take vacations as families and we go elsewhere, or folks come into Massachusetts, all I can do is ask that we are all vigilant in our own selves, and that we do the right things. That if we're going to a high area of COVID, that you come home and think about quarantining. That's what sounds like good public health expectations. And again, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a doctor, but if I was to do that, that might be something we would consider as well. So I certainly think there is, I don't want to pretend that COVID's not going to strike again. It is, and it's more than likely going to impact our schools. It's going to impact our community, and we just have to be prepared to adjust and pivot when it does. And we can't pretend that it's just going to be, no matter how we run our school system, whether it's a hybrid, in-person, or remote, that it's not going to occur. It is, and we recognize that first. We have to be flexible as a community, as educators. And I know as a 20-year educator that flexibility hasn't always been my strength, especially in the classroom. So we will continue to work through that. Will you consider changing the start times to later now that everything is on the table? The Mendez bus drops them off at 40 minutes before it starts. So a couple things with the start times. Working in the bus routes is very challenging. As I said, we don't have enough buses to start routes later. We have a limited amount of buses. That's why the routes are a little bit earlier. We certainly cannot and will be looking at our not just the start times, but our drop-offs, because we can't have kids just coming into the building and waiting, in the cafeteria anymore, like they do, or the small gym like they do at the middle school, or in the cafeteria at the high school. We can't do that. We have to find ways to be more efficient with our drop-offs and our pickups. Also, start times are part of negotiated contracts. So no matter how we look at our contracts and our start and our model of the schooling, that has to be negotiated. I touched on the HVAC and crucial role in air movement and quality, what precautions are taken. I think the precautions are taken, number of things, making sure that all of our systems are running at the highest efficiency, our controls are working, that even from a standpoint of our windows, the ability to open our windows and have proper screening. We have many teachers that have never opened a window in their classrooms. So right now our facilities staff is going around and checking windows, making sure the screens work, making sure the latches work, that we can get the windows open and create better flow. Are you prepared with online only classes just in case? That is one of the options that we have to be prepared for. And we are working towards that. That's plan number 3 that the department has asked for. And part of that is identifying a platform that K through 12 can use. And we're fortunate we have Google Classroom, Google Meets, the Google Suite, which is part of our education package that we will be training staff on. Part of the concern I have is that we did ask our educators to jump into a variety of formats. Some felt comfortable with Zoom, some felt comfortable with Google Meets, but we need to be consistent across the board and across the entire district. So the one thing I've been advocating for is that we look at modifying our calendar for the school year, where we add more professional development days early on before kids come back. So maybe pushing the calendar back to after Labor Day, but bring our staff back so they can be trained in how to use more effectively the Google Suites, Google Meets and Google Classroom. I think that alone would help make our online learning more robust in terms of the ability and the comfort level of being synchronous or in-person learning. There's going to be a lot more synchronous learning than the asynchronous piece. There will still be components of asynchronous learning. I think there's some value to that in a hybrid model. So how we do it will take time. But that being said, time on learning is dictated by Mass General Law. And the commissioner has to waive the 180 days, and the high school 990 hours and the elementary 900 hours. We've got to look at that. And that is the Massachusetts Teachers Association, along with the Boston Teachers Union and the American Federation of Teachers, the three largest unions representing educators in Massachusetts, are negotiating with the Commissioner of Education weekly. They started last week, and they'll be meeting twice a week for the next 3 weeks, hopefully trying to come to some conclusions about the calendar piece, especially, and time on learning. I've advocated as well to, with the commissioner, and it has gone on deaf ears at this point, to do away with MCAS for another year, where we could gain some more hours and days of learning instead of preparing and setting up for tests. Okay, so some of these are very specific to buildings, and I can't give you those specifics, but I'll read them anyway. What will in-person learning look like given rotating schedule at the high school? Again, they're working through that model. What we do want is we want some consistency across the district. So if families have students at Mendez, use an example, Mendez, the middle and the high school, that whatever that rotation looks like, it's the same for those families. So families don't have to find and struggle with a structure that only works for one set of kids, but not the other set. But that being said, as the high school is the greatest challenge to me. Actually, I think the middle and the high school, because they have so many periods in the day. What's the plan if the numbers of COVID rise again before school opens? This is one of the reasons why the Commissioner of Education has said, we do not want you making any decisions before the first week of August or before August 10th. We want to look at the data. We want to look at the science. We want to look at the cases. And so hold off on making any decisions. So he's been really clear. He put out a statement last week that he has asked school committees as well as superintendents to hold off because they want to look at the data first. It's quite possible, right, that if there's a rise, that we have to go directly into remote learning. We have to be able to do that. So this is why it's important that we get our plan in place by the 10th, and that we're flexible. How do we deal with substitute teachers, if any are needed? That's a great question, and one we've asked numerous times. I can tell you that most likely if we have substitute teachers, which we may need, which we will need, they will have to be dedicated to certain buildings. We're not going to be going in between buildings so again, to limit exposure. Two, when we're looking at parent volunteers, we're probably not going to have parent volunteers this year. No field trips. These are all things that, again, it's about mitigating any risk that we can. So we will continue to look at those things. What's happening with fall sports? And I can't give you that answer. The MIAA is in charge of all athletics. They should be making a statement, I hope, within the next 2 weeks, so we can understand how to move forward. And I saw Framingham State today, as well as their league, canceled all fall sports. We would be hard pressed to continue to have sporting events. That being said, there are sports that are naturally, they have physical distancing, golf, maybe baseball and softball that they're allowing to occur right now. I think it's going to be important to see if any data arises from summer, summer youth sports, and how that might impact the MIA's decisions to move forward. I worry about our transportation with athletics. If we can only have one person every other seat, and the astronomical costs for busing as well. What are your thoughts on leveling tiered learning groups this upcoming school year? For example, will it be manageable to split students into math or reading groups? What about advanced math at the middle school? So again, I think part of what we're looking at with our hybrid models is to keep our kids in the proper levels, but do so in a way that reduces the amount of transitions. So instead of having 6 classes a day, maybe it's down to 3, and we have longer classes. Maybe it's 4 and we have longer classes. So those are the things that are being discussed, because we recognize not only do we have levels, we also have inclusion opportunities for our special education students who are included in our classrooms, and our English language learner students. And we want to make sure that we can continue to meet the needs of all of our kids. If school is in class in the fall and we opt to keep our children home for their health, varying for personal reasons, will those absences be excused, or will they go against the child? Also kept home, how will they go about getting classwork? So again, I think we will be looking at our attendance policies, and we will be as flexible as necessary with families due to COVID, for sure. And we will have to work with families to make sure that work is received by students. I think it's critically important, right, that there are a number of things to mitigate: washing hands, good hygiene, wearing masks, physically distancing, but staying home when you're not well, and when you don't feel well. Don't go to school, don't go to work. Make sure that you're healthy when you do attend. And I think that will help reduce any further concerns. For students who receive special education services, how will these services be improved? Kathy Silva, the Director of Student Services, is in constant contact with the Department of Ed and the requirements that we will be reading, and the guidance that we'll be getting on delivering special education services. We recognize the spring was not ideal for any of us. I've mentioned more than on one occasion, I have a student, my youngest student, Sam, is on an IEP, didn't get the speech services that he needs. I understand that it was very challenging to do it remotely. But that being said, we've got to figure out a way as school districts, as does his, to provide the services that are required under their IEPs. But I think part of it is, we have to be flexible as well as parents, but still advocating for the needs of our kids. Students in substantially separate classrooms for math and ELA, they go in inclusion, science, social studies. How will this happen? Again, we're trying to ensure that we can have the model of inclusion. I believe in inclusion. I think it's good for all students, and we will work hard at developing a schedule that meets that need. How is APS thought through the practicality and the parity and safety of having K1 students not in mask and grade 2 students in mask? I mentioned that right at the beginning. I don't think you can have a Warren school with just one grade with masks on. I think pre-K through 12, I will be recommending that our students and our adults wear masks unless there are medical reasons that they can't wear masks, and then maybe we're considering face shields or some other form of protection. How is APS prepared to keep rooms clean after lunch, specifically regarding food allergies and pests, larger covered refuse receptacles, dustpans, brooms, things of that nature? So we actually have to look at where we're delivering our nutrition. The guidance from the Department of Ed says, hey, you know what? Do it in the classroom. And I'm saying, whoa, hold on a minute. That actually makes, when they were saying this with the 3-foot social physical distancing, and I was like, yeah, they have to take their mask off. And when you say they take their mask off, they need to be at least 6 feet apart. How does that work eating lunch? It doesn't work, right? Secondly, who's going to come in and clean the classroom right after lunch so they can continue to have education? What does lunch look like? So we're working with the nutrition services, but we're also looking at areas that we can provide our students to have lunch in areas that are bigger and less crowded and have the flexibility to be cleaned. So staggered lunchtime, so there's time in between to get everything cleaned. We're going to hire and have to hire more custodial staff. That's just a given in this environment to ensure that throughout the day things are cleaned properly. And that's one of the reasons why I like a model where we have a day in between where the whole building can be sanitized appropriately. What's the decision made required? I'm assuming this means community service. It didn't say community service. Again, we will look at all of the graduation requirements throughout the process. I can't answer that at this point. This year we were flexible with it. Clearly, students didn't have time to meet their community service needs. The first day of school is the first day of school on September 2nd, subject to change. Actually, our first day of school was well before September 2nd, which I believe was, I'm just looking at my calendar, I think it was August, for kids, it was August 26th, or August 27th, excuse me. Yeah, because Labor Day, oh, maybe, no, you're right. It was August, it was September 2nd. I apologize. I was thinking we're in a little bit earlier this year. So yes, right now, but I do hope it changes, to be honest with you. I hope we're gonna move that date back until after Labor Day. This is the same exact question, talking about symptoms that qualify for isolation. That'll be a nursing decision. Those guidelines will be coming out. I've encountered COVID patients with headaches, sore throat, GI upset, fatigue, which are also the vast majority of school health visits, especially at the younger age for sure. Only a quarter of that I've worked with had fever, cough. Generally, fever was very mild. So this sounds like a nurse to me. And again, I think what we'll have to do is we're going to rely upon our nursing staff in the Department of Health to make sure that we have those protocols in place. I have asked this question myself. How will outside time be approached given the likelihood of Triple E again this year? Year of 2020 can't end soon enough, to be honest. We started in the fall last year, if you remember, with Triple E. So sundown to sun up, we couldn't have sports outside. We couldn't have activities outside. That was driven by the local Board of Health, and we had to adjust our schedules based on that. I would fully anticipate if we are in that situation again, that we will be following the guidelines of the Board of Health. If a student teacher in one classroom is tested positive, with the whole class quarantine, will siblings, again, will the district have a designated testing site to work with? So how will school address students whose families won't abide by travel and quarantine guidelines? Someone asked this earlier too. I can control what I can control in the public schools. If families don't say or tell me they go away for a weekend, the kid's out of school and they call in sick and they go somewhere out of state or cross three state lines, I've got to hope that they're thoughtful and considerate of the rest of the community, and that they are taking every precaution necessary to ensure the safety not only of their children but all the other children in our faculty and staff. Again, it goes back to we can ask for folks to be thoughtful and to be considerate, but I can't control that. I have a son with underlying condition as well as ADHD. What will be the plan for kids like my son that has both these conditions? He's at risk for severe complications and has difficult time focusing with online learning. And again, we understand and we recognize that we didn't do a great job with this. And we've got to continue to find ways to work with our students who are most in need of specific attention. I certainly believe that there's a segment of our student population that's most vulnerable that needs to be in school every day. Many of our sub-separate special education programs, our English language learner students, those students who have been working on, Title I math or Title I reading, or students who are getting additional support. There are going to be larger gaps from the spring that we need to be focused on. And hopefully, we will find a way to be able to do this. Yeah, this is more of a comment about, homeschooling. I can test remote science classes and labs are nearly impossible. I agree. Using virtual high school, online language is also very difficult. Band impossible. Can graduation requirements be adjusted if remote learners choose to augment their studies with additional classes to make up for downtime? Again, I think all of these are very specific to the high school. And I certainly believe that as we develop the plans for each building, there will be more questions which we have to answer. I think we need to focus specifically first on what opening the buildings will look like. And if we can do that, then we can get to some of the questions. There will inevitably be, and I said this today to my some of my admin team, there will be questions we have not thought of, and there will be answers to questions that we don't have. Be honest with ourselves, be honest with our families, be honest with each other, and say, okay, if we don't know, how can we find it? We are trying to coordinate a massive undertaking here. I don't think it's an impossible undertaking. I just think it's a massive undertaking, and never before has 350 communities, 351 communities in the Commonwealth been charged with creating something so bold as this, or so needed as this. And we just need to be able to breathe, step back, understand and respect the fact that we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to ask for forgiveness. We're going to ask for patience. We will continue to ask questions of local towns. I am in contact with superintendents every single day from the surrounding communities. What are you thinking? How are you approaching this? What are some things that your community is saying they wish you would do? How are you handling childcare for your teachers and your staff when they're teaching and they live in a different community? What does that look like? How is it you're dealing with the families who have the youngest kids who don't have childcare and are working from home? And how do they deal with that? Are you developing more relationships outside of your extended day program with local childcare centers in say Ashland or Medway or wherever it is, to ensure that if we're at a remote level, that there is an opportunity for families to use that care. So there's a lot going on, and hopefully we will be able to answer most of those questions in the near future. I'm going to take a pause for a second. Those are the questions, only the questions that were sent in. It looks like there's 99 plus questions on the Q&A. So let's see if I've answered any of those and go from there. Thumbs up if we're ready to move on, if we're good with that. Okay, or hands up, I should say. Good. So it looks like we're all right. So we'll keep moving here. Okay. Oh, this is a 14er, so this is good. Yes. Okay. So first question. I don't know if you all can see the questions or not. Can you thumbs up if you can see the questions in the Q&A? You must be able to, because you have to put a thumb up. Okay, fair enough. Answering my own question, right? That was silly. So let me read this. Have you considered a hybrid model where new material is covered in person and practice material is covered, is provided to do at home? Absolutely. This to me is the best model. As I've probably mentioned to a number of you, I live in a house with a high school Spanish teacher, and I run all different types of models by her. She is on her opening school task force as a teacher and helping identify the best model for high school students where she works. And we certainly think that this is a wonderful model to look at. Let's remind people that school is not intended to be daycare. Safety first. Not worth taking risks with our children, and there are people at home who will catch it from the student. Some of these children live with elderly, some live with single parents who cannot risk catching this. I couldn't agree more. And actually, I think there was a study, I read it briefly. I don't know if it's 13% of our students have elderly family members who live with them across the nation. It's pretty high. So yes, this is, as I stated at the beginning, decisions that we make from our schooling and that we ask the families make is about health first. This is a public health crisis. It still is. It's just because our numbers are doing well here in Massachusetts does not mean there will not be a spike. There will be. Let's recognize that, do the best we can to continue to keep people safe. If it's not safe for us to be meeting to discuss this tonight, how can it be safe for our children to be together in full classrooms on a daily basis? It seems that a hybrid model would be the safest. I'm not disagreeing with you, but we have 221 folks tonight. And if we wanted to meet, we could have done this in the high school gymnasium at 6 feet apart. We did set it up for town meeting. So we could do this, but I just think this is more practical for me to be able to deliver information. But I did ask that question of a neighbor recently, and not dealing with 220 people, but dealing with just 25 students. How can we put 25 students and a teacher in a classroom 3 feet apart if they're unwilling to go to their office with 15 people 6 feet apart? It's a great question. But again, I started the conversation tonight by saying I have not bought into the 3 foot recommendation, and I will be recommending to the school committee that 6 feet is our minimum. Can we have more printed out materials each week to bring back more manipulatives, more teaching online for homeschooling? Potentially, yeah. We would have to talk specifically with the principals after we're set up to see what truly is needed. But yes, I think that's something we should consider. So the group B who are not physically present in school, would they have live online class sessions going on? That is part of the conversation that we're having that we would have to negotiate. A couple things with that. When we've got to be thoughtful of teachers in the classrooms with video cameras and taping while they're teaching. That is certainly a conversation we need to have from a bargaining standpoint. And so there are some teachers who said, Jim, we do want to record ourselves, be live. There are a couple things that my tech people reminded me of today. If every teacher did that, the bandwidth needed within our school system in order to do that. Right now, we are trying to track down cameras themselves that can be used in the classroom to videotape while we're teaching. They're not readily available. So the technology is being eaten up across the United States. But these are certainly things that we are considering. And again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of determining what model we're using, but there can still be some asynchronous learning, so taped lessons that could be used in preparation for a day before kids come into the classroom. So we will consider all things and all options for sure. Let me see. I answered that. I don't know if Mike's still here anymore. Dismiss.
Jim,
okay.
I am here. I'm not able to see the questions for some reason anymore. I don't know what happened.
Okay, no worries. If you go with a hybrid or remote learning, how will you assist families of K-5 where both parents are still expected to work outside the home or essential workers and now will struggle to find financially support childcare coverage who can't be supervised at home and a parent will not be present for daytime online learning? Yeah, this is the struggle that we're having is how do we make this work? And I will be straight up. We're not going to make everybody happy. It's not going to work for every family. It's not going to work necessarily for my family of four with 4 different school districts who are not going to be in alignment with how each of them presents learning in the fall. We will obviously take into consideration every piece of the puzzle for our families. And we will strive to ensure that there's care provided, and that our kids are in school as much as they can be in a safe environment for our students and for our faculty and staff. And that's all I can say right now. I don't want to promise something I can't deliver. And I certainly can empathize with that sentiment. We're 3 feet apart, working side by side in the hospitals. Understood. Air-sized particles that airborne can go over 10 feet, trying to understand the rationale for the school-age population. I agree with you. Therefore, we will not be recommending 3 feet. 6 feet in mass is our minimum. I think we're all on the same page. I think our educators are on the same page as well. Why will you not recommend a 3-foot separation? If the state is okay with it, why not? If this gets kids in the classrooms, why not? Again, I will state, I think it's the wrong choice by the state. I believe the CDC has still recommended 6 feet. I believe the state is pushing it 3 to 6 feet, but if you read their language, it's preferred 6 feet. It's not. It's saying, listen, if you can get everybody, push them back in, great. You can't go below 3 feet. We prefer you're at 6 feet. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Is it going to be really costly? And it could be really costly to do that, especially from a busing standpoint. We know the transportation costs would go up astronomically to do this, because they're still not separating 3 feet on buses. It's still 6 feet as of today. So that's why I personally believe that 6 feet has to be our number. Can you clarify whom is leading the public health guidance informing your decision making? The health guidance, there are probably 3 factors here. The Department of Public Health is relaying information to the Commissioner of Education and the working group for the Commissioner of Education. There are doctors, there are nurses, there are DPH individuals on that committee. So when they're talking about health, wearing of masks, that's a mandate that is coming from the Commissioner of Education as guided by the Department of Public Health at the state level. Audrey LaCroix, who is our head nurse, is in contact with the Nurses Association for Public Schools as well. She is working and has worked throughout the summer, understanding the decisions we need to make as it relates specifically to COVID. Our public board of health in town, while not a decision maker for the public schools, will certainly have policies that drive some of our decisions that we make. So there are a multitude of health factors. Jim, we shut down the school system in response to a middle school student having confirmed interaction with asymptomatic persons representing a plurality of the COVID-19 actual cases testing. Okay. What is the guidance decision to reopen school system? Decision to reopen seems to be in conflict with decision making that led to closing the schools. I certainly think, Drew, to your point, what we didn't know then, we reacted based on what we thought was the best at that time. I think over the course of 4 months now, we're looking at the data, and the data say, we certainly can bring kids back, but at what level is what we're debating, whether it's full-time with all kids, which I believe is the right move to do, versus a part of it, partly in person, limited space away from one another, and then completely online remote. What I know for a fact is that the online remote did not work for the majority of our families in our community. So we've got to figure out a way to, again, keep folks safe first and foremost, but then to deliver a high quality education. What decision-making guidelines have been set for determining if we'd revert back to online? That, again, is in the works right now, and that conversation is occurring, is ongoing at the state level, because we have asked specifically for guidance so we're consistent across districts and communities. If online is required, what's the plan to deliver a coherent online learning should this be necessary? I did answer that earlier. We have to plan and prepare and provide some really in-depth professional development to our faculty and staff to ensure that the online learning is way more robust than it was in the spring, and that there's deliverance and movement of curricula as well as assessments. Understood. So this is just a comment about pre-K through 1 wear mask recommendation because they are most inclined to touch their mask and faces. It may create a greater hazard. Can you explain your rationale in asking those ages to wear masks given that guidance? Again, I think my rationale is the struggles we may have. I'm seeing in the summer school programs that we're having, pre-K and K students who are wearing masks, it seems to be going well. Again, maybe it's a very small data sample. I understand. I just think as we look at that, I might be persuaded otherwise. I guess my gut feeling says having all students within a building wearing the mask will present less challenges than having 2 grades not wearing masks and 1 group wearing masks walking around the buildings. But again, I am always willing to look at information and evidence that tells me otherwise. And again, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to pretend to be. And I think I want to make sure that our staff feel comfortable as well, and that our families feel comfortable sending their kids to our schools. Can you clarify the public health guidance informing? I already did. If 60% want in school, why waste time on the hybrid model? Good question. I think the 60%, if I broke it down, the number of emails I received after the fact, because the 60% didn't stipulate 3 feet or 6 feet, the number of emails I received saying, you know what, I want to rescind that, and that data is still in there. Unless it's 6 feet, we're not in favor of that. So that could be a good question that I have that I send in the next survey. But thank you for bringing that up. But that means 40% are not considering coming to school at all. The hybrid model wouldn't work for them, or the in-person wouldn't work. So again, I'll be clear. I'm not going to satisfy everybody. But I'm going to recommend what I think is the best, and we'll go from there. As a parent working full time, I can't be home for remote learning days to support my children. Is there an option for no remote? Again, if we're in a hybrid, there's going to be a piece of remote. If there's full remote, which again, there will be a time this year where I just believe that we will have to shut down. All indicators are, when looking at what's happening around the country, that we will get a spike again, and it could be a shutdown for an extended period of time for all of us. I don't want that, of course, but I think there's an opportunity that may exist. Will the after-school programs be offered in the in-person and hybrid models? I'm assuming you're just referring to extended day programs, but also Champions and maybe YMCA. We are working with those organizations. Extended day, they all have different guidelines they have to follow with the amount of students that they can actually admit. So I know Ms. Mercon-Smith for EDP will be working through her regulations, and she'll be sharing those out. We will then contact the YMCA as well as Champions, but also local daycare providers to see what opportunities exist for our families. Thank you. Can you describe what the social emotional education so key to kindergarten looks like in a hybrid, right? So Jen Cutler, who is our director of social emotional learning, has been working with our counselors, and they're devising plans to ensure that the students, not just K, but all the way through, we're going to have numerous students at all levels who have been impacted and have trauma from the spring and right through. And so we are working towards having curricula that is trauma informed and working with those families, identifying them, assessing them early, trying to catch and support those students as early as possible. But again, more specific guidelines from Jen Cutler will be a part of our program. How can teachers prepare a robust remote model in the last 2 weeks of August? That's a really good question. It will be a challenge, but again, I think they have a great step from what they learned in the spring. Many of the teachers have been working already. I've received numerous emails from staff saying, listen, I'm ready to take this forward from a remote learning standpoint. And I trust that, as most teachers who work during the summer, they understand that coming back to school is going to be very different, and they're modifying their lesson plans now and their curriculum now for their classes to make it more robust. They understand the stakes are going to be a lot different than they were in the spring. That was clearly relayed to them. I meet with them. I'll be meeting with them Monday night at 7:00 again. Hundreds of staff come on Monday nights to meet with me, and they know that's the expectation. But this is part of the reason why we need to start that process now. It's not just in the last 2 weeks of August, but the professional development of designing lessons and using platforms is beginning now. So it's not just the last 2 weeks of August. Will face shields be considered for use in conjunction with masks? For example, while sitting at desk, can teachers and students wear shields without a mask for improved understanding? The way the mandate reads is face mask or facial coverings. So we have asked specifically, Kristen, to have that clarified at the state level. Just so you know, we as superintendents are meeting with the commissioner. We met with him recently this week, and every week we're meeting. That is a specific question we had as well. Does a face covering, a face shield, meet the requirement as written in the guidelines? So stay tuned on that. How does remote work? Would they be dialing into the classroom while other groups in class, or would they be having smaller sessions with the teacher? That's the pieces to be determined. In again, the complexities of a high school versus an elementary school. I keep thinking about our elementary schools, and the numbers are much smaller in terms of class sizes. And does that mean we could potentially have all elementary kids in classes all day? So if you're only 15 kids in an elementary class spread out 6 feet apart, that's similar to 15 kids at the high school in a hybrid model. So we're looking at all of those things and asking those questions because, if we've got, so we have at the Mendez School or the Warren School, 20, 30, 40, 60 kids potentially just saying they want just remote. Our class sizes get reduced dramatically. And therefore, we could potentially have all of the kids at that level in class all day long. With 6 feet of social distance or physical distancing. So all of this is really important data that we're collecting and that will inform our decisions. Again, as far as buses, the survey only had yes or no. Yep, I put yes, but we'll drive as long as I am working from home. Maybe a survey needs to dig a little deeper to see how many others will do the same. Correct. The bus costs will not be reduced, but I thank you for that. We have a contract and we have 19 buses no matter what. It would reduce any additional costs for sure. If families do not need to use the bus, certainly I would recommend reaching out to Erin Paolini, who is our transportation coordinator. We can refund the bus money for this year. And we certainly, there are communities who are looking at transportation and saying, by law, we only have to, transport K through 6 outside 2 miles. But I believe that we need to be transporting, especially our most vulnerable students who wouldn't otherwise come to school. So we need to be looking at all of our plans. So if there are families that can walk or drive or bike to school, the more we can do that, the better off it will be, and not have students on buses. The international experience suggests young children are unlikely to get COVID and are minimally vectors for transmission. Most European countries are opening schools. Social distancing should maintain reasonable accommodation, 1 meter. Understood. I think there is some research that does support that. What does EDP look like? That will be coming out. Ms. Melissa will have all of that information for our community, hopefully soon. I did consider 3 foot of separation, but when I go into a classroom and I see 31 or 30 chairs at 3 feet apart in high school classrooms and middle school especially, it doesn't work. It's not safe. How would hybrid or full remote learning work for working parents of elementary? I don't know, and I mentioned that before. I'm not going to say it's going to work. I'm not going to say that it's going to be perfect. It's not, and we will have to continue to try to find the best possible solution we can for our entire community. How quickly can teachers be expected? I think teachers have been working towards this since March. And yes, it's going to be a lot to ask. It's a lot to ask of every single person who's on this webinar tonight to move to a very different form of learning again for the foreseeable future. It's very difficult for to have a plan written in 10 days as the Commissioner of Education wants it to be done. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It doesn't mean it's not going to get done and done well. It does mean that we have high expectations and we will figure it out. Will the plan be submitted to the state, be locked in for the year, or able to shift to reflect changing circumstances? Their intention is that it should be flexible to change based on circumstances on the ground. Yes, we could absolutely end up in a hybrid and start with a remote. We could end up in a hybrid and start with end with everyone back in school. So it will depend on again, state guidance for there. But yes, Tammy, absolutely. We need to be part of the reason we're going through the exercises is we need to look at it as a very fluid situation and be flexible. When you look at the schools in the South who were planning on opening full bore, everybody in, now everyone's stopping. Not everyone, but the majority are saying stop. We're going only remote to start for the first 12 weeks. Then we'll go ahead and reevaluate. The thing about Massachusetts and the thing about the commissioner is pushing things back till August is he wants to see how things are panning out throughout the country as well. 2/3 of children tested positive. How will we know who's a carrier? I don't know. And that is another great question about testing. Should all educators and students be tested to go back to school? It would be great if we had that opportunity, and it will be something that I don't think can happen, but it would be great if it could. How will nurses know the difference between flu symptoms and COVID symptoms? Well, that's a great question for the nurses, and I would let them answer it, but they are being trained to look for certain signs. I don't know what those are, but I certainly think that Audrey LaCroix, our head nurse, is absolutely on top of all this. And if you wanted to reach out to her, she'd be happy to respond to you, Stacy. I already did that. How are educators feeling about going back in buildings, in-person learning? That's a great question. And I survey my staff just as much as I survey, actually more than I survey the community. And like I said, I meet with my staff to see how they're feeling. And if you read stuff in the newspapers from the Massachusetts Teachers Association and and all the other unions, the knowledge or the demands that they're pushing out is that no one wants to go back as educators. And that's not true. What they're saying is that we want to come back and be with our kids, but we want to do it in a safe and thoughtful way. If I was to say we're only going back with 3 feet of space in between, it would be a heck of a challenge for me to get my teaching staff to agree to that and to say it's the right thing to do. But at 6 feet in a hybrid, they're more likely to consider that. Remote, there are going to be some teachers who need to teach remotely because they have the underlying conditions. When we talk about just asymptomatic carriers of kids, we have a number of teachers who are in high-risk categories, young teachers and veteran teachers. So, but to answer your question, they're certainly hesitant depending upon what safeguards we put in place for them. Advocate opening customers for elementary school gauges. Remote learning is ineffective for this group. Ineffective for my children. Per our experience last spring, we consider a full-time attendee group. I just mentioned that that when we're looking at the numbers, I think we can K-5 can be treated differently than 6 through 8 or 6 through 12, and that's what we're investigating. So to your point, John, I read that article as well, but we've got to look at our numbers. And again, our numbers are different than other communities, and we're going to base our decisions in our community. And if we're at 15 kids in a class, to me, it's reasonable, right, to expect those students, elementary students, to be in classes, spread out 6 feet from a physical distancing. And yeah, we need them in. The social emotional damage, the educational loss, but it can't be compromised at physical health for everybody else. Even with few cases, we had to close the school. If we open school, we may see spread in just days to weeks. Why do we have to take this risk? Why not remote next school year? We may be opening and closing with open and hybrid. At least elementary should be done remote. It's difficult to make elementary kids follow these rules. Again, I think we underestimate our kids, and I certainly think that we can find a model that's going to work. If we go with in-school learning, how will social distancing be maintained during school bus commute? Will there be increase in buses? I mentioned that earlier. There are no buses available. We called our bus company, Connolly Bus, and we said, listen, if we need to add buses, how can we do that? If we try getting 2 or 3 buses already, and they said, we don't have any available, and nor do we have drivers. There's a shortage across the entire country on both. All of the districts that are serviced by Connolly Bus have asked, and they said, we've got a fleet of about 60 extra buses that are there only for emergency purposes when buses break down. So we may have to consider having monitors on buses to ensure that they stay physically distanced on the buses. This is another piece of the puzzle that the Department of Ed, there were 3 pieces that were still outstanding that we're supposed to be getting guidance on: transportation, athletics, and special education. And we're hoping to get that from the state in the next week. What about kids on IEPs who are going to do remote learning, individual classes? Again, every one of those cases we have to look at individually, and to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the guidelines as written in the IEPs. If I choose to homeschool, will there be any support provided from the school teacher to support us in that kind of schedule or model? Or will we be advised just to follow the state guidelines for homeschooling? So this is what I mentioned earlier as well. There are a couple avenues we can take. You can say, I'm homeschooling, and you can go ahead and you set the curriculum, you set the day, you just have to write to us and fill out the paperwork, and we sign off on it in the curriculum office to say, yes, you're going to meet the requirements. I'm hoping that we can create a model that allows for more interaction with the Ashland Public Schools and a much higher degree of education than might otherwise get just by saying, I'm going to keep my kid home and provide an off-the-shelf homeschooling model. And it's not to say it doesn't work for some families. It certainly does. And we've had numerous homeschool students who come in, take classes at the high school, and are phenomenal students. But it's a lot of work by parents. I know that, to ensure that homeschooling is done in such a manner that allows for the student to grow. But yeah, we can certainly have that conversation how we move forward. That will be the survey. We need to know specifically who is going to keep their kids home so we can devise a plan for those students. Can both hybrid and full models be offered? Parents can pick the one they feel comfortable. I don't know how we would do that in terms of staffing. I think it would get very expensive for us. We would have to almost double our staffing in order to take hybrid and full models into play. I certainly will think about that. I don't see it as a possibility, but again, I always like to look at the challenge of what that might mean to us as a district. Something jumped ahead. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not reading the thanks. And I mean, listen, we're working hard at it. That's all I can say. Will you and Kathy be hosting another Zoom meeting to address questions specific to the opening, how it impacts special education students? I will see if she's available, and see if she's has interest in doing that. She's been tied up with our extended year summer programming. We are lucky to be in Ashland and Massachusetts. There's no doubt about that. Kids are fine. It's the adults that we're overthinking this. We appreciate your assistance in this trying time. No worries. Again, I want to be clear. I think we can always have differing opinions, and I will always respect folks for having a different opinion than I do. I live with it in my own house every single day with my wife, and it's not a bad thing because it makes us think differently. It makes us think about and challenge one another, and that's not a bad thing because sometimes you learn and you grow from that challenge. And like I said as well, not everyone's going to be happy with this. Teachers aren't happy. They want kids in school. They want to be teaching your children in front of them. That's what they want more than anything in the world. But they don't want to do it where they're going to be in physical health risk, or kids are going to be at risk, or bringing something home to families. And I can't blame them for that part. Can you have some teachers dedicated fully remote classes to support the 40% who don't want to send their kids to school? That's what I'm working on. And that will have to be negotiated. But I have a plan for that. I can't really talk about that plan because, again, it needs to be vetted through our unions, et cetera. But yes, I think we have a tremendous opportunity to help with that, with those families that want to stay home. What infection rates and data models would trigger one option versus the other between in class? Again, Dan, I wish I could give you that specific answer. I don't know, but I certainly think we have to settle on a model or what would trigger it. And to be honest, the longer we wait for the state and the governor and the commissioner of education to provide us that those trigger numbers, the more worried I get that we may have to just make a localized decision and determine what that model looks like. But you're asking the same questions that we ask. The governor, you remember, is the one who can shut down the schools at any time. So the governor might look at a model and say, when X amount of cases occur within the Commonwealth, we're shutting it all down. And Ashland needs to be ready to go right into remote learning because we won't have a choice. So we will continue to follow that. do I anticipate starting on time, or might there be a delay to provide? I hope that there's a delay, that we can get our teachers in to train them, to get them not only trained in using online platforms, but trained in understanding COVID. And our nurses have a lot of training to do with our staff, talking about masks and hand washing and the use of sanitizer and the cleaning of the rooms and all of those things. There are lots of pieces that have to be discussed. How are we going to deliver our special education services? And so I hope that the commissioner will push back the calendar a little bit. But right now he is holding us to the 180 school days and the hour requirement. What if some families can't do homeschool or manage online education and don't want to send to school? Basically, they can skip a year. So Mass General Law says you can't do that. That there's a compulsory age and that you have to be in school. So it's against the law. That's all I can say to that piece. With the hybrid model, how would that work for siblings? Part of it is we would try to make sure that all siblings are on the same schedule. We recognize, again, how disruptive it's going to be no matter what model we choose, unless we were full-time, everyone in school, et cetera. That being said, we will continue to look at siblings and making sure that we take those into consideration before making any final decisions. With a hybrid model, will there be synchronous learning during remote days? That's quite possible. Again, depending upon what the model is, Tina, that we choose and negotiate, those are things that I feel strongly about as well. And we will have to, again, over the next few weeks, get through this and make some really, hopefully, brilliant choices. Thank you for providing more information. How are attendance policies being modified to address the idea that kids are going to be encouraged to stay home if they aren't feeling well? Each building principal will be working towards adjusting their policy and their procedures, which will then have to go through, if it's a policy, that's a school committee decision making. If it's procedural within a school where students are losing credit, we need to make sure that the site councils of each school building are addressing that. I am meeting with the principals on Monday, and this is actually one of the topics of discussion that we're having, going back and forth here between the questions. Will high school kids have the same community service requirements? That was asked earlier. That is to be determined. Will there be any random test plan for students once school starts in person? I don't know what you mean by random test. So maybe if you want to rewrite that so I can better understand it, that'd be great. Will there be a random test plan for students once school starts in person? I don't know if it means assessments or, if this Monday, Tuesday is group A and Thursday would be, will they switch halfway through the year to accommodate Monday holidays? Great question, right? I mean, these are the things that we have to think about in terms of the actual number of days and the equity of learning and what does that schedule look like? So believe me, we are looking at all of those scenarios for sure. Once a plan is in place, will principals, educators at individual schools do webinars to talk? Yes, they will. Once a plan is in place, you can expect that individual principals will have opportunities to have these sessions for families to ask questions. No, there will be virtual classes with remote learning this year, not just assignments. How would any split shift impact sub-separate rooms? As I think about sub-separate rooms, I'm thinking based on the guidance that we're getting from the Department of Ed, a number of our sub-separate classrooms, as well as our a number of students who are, need additional supports, they would be in the majority of time, if not all the time. Because again, we're dealing with very small numbers. My kids are in camp and they're all together. I go to stores and people are all together. I think Ashland's overdoing it here. For those in high risk, wear a mask and a shield. Okay. For any K, any chance of returning to half-day K as the method of splitting the population, and it would require cleaning in between. Yeah, we're even considering those things. And again, how does it impact transportation and any additional costs that we may have? But that is absolutely a question that we are asking. You mentioned Chromebooks for students. Is that even if going full in person? The answer is yes. Yes. That's absolutely in case there's another shutdown, or I just think it's time we move into that model for sure. I realize it's challenging me on words. Thank you to you and those in the school for what you've done. Although there might not be issues with teachers union, has there been any thought about creating? Yes, there are conversations about outdoor learning spaces, putting up tents, looking up opportunities to move kids outside during the day. So we're absolutely looking at outdoor spaces. High schools in the state prior to COVID, many statewide early childhood run outdoor programs. It's definitely worth looking at. I agree. Yes, classrooms. That's why I mentioned at the beginning. Our facilities department is actually going through all the rooms, making sure the windows can open and that we can keep them open, and ensuring that we have screens that are functional and working. And I, like I said, so Courtney, I did answer that because that's what we are doing. Those are the things that we are putting into place. So everything you're mentioning are things that we are considering, and have considered and are doing now. Yeah, so cafeterias are an interesting thing. We're looking at additional spaces, including outdoor space for lunch. And yes, students will have to be 6 feet apart in order to have cafeteria. We don't know what nutrition services will look like yet, but we will continue to monitor that. What are you thinking of doing now, full in-person, hybrid, or remote? We have to consider all options, and I think the full in-person would be a challenge for us from a logistic and health standpoint. Thank you, Tracy, for the question about the busing. Someone mentioned it earlier as well, and I will put that in the next survey. Should a vaccine be ready in 20? Are you formulating policy for vaccination, or is there a policy being formulated? That would come at the state level. We should test all kids. I would love to if we could. I don't know how we're going to do that, Jill. And I think all staff and kids should be tested. And that has been mentioned as well to the Commissioner of Education, who has relayed that to the governor, for what that's worth. Essentially, COVID is less dangerous for youngsters. Okay, I don't. So we're down to 65 questions. I don't want to get into any of the political aspects of COVID or opinions. I understand that if it's if you're focused on certain questions, that's what I would like to focus on. But if it's just going to devolve into one's own belief at this point, I understand that. You can email me separately, but we've got 65 questions and it's almost 9 o'clock. So I'd like to get through it. Is maximizing the ventilation system sufficient to prevent aerosol transmission? We hope so. We're looking at our systems and we're analyzing them, and that's the intent of going through the process of looking at our HVAC programs, our filters, our airflow, et cetera. School calendar could possibly be changing, yes. The protocol, again, as I mentioned earlier, and again, these are, if I guess look at the timestamp, I probably mentioned it. Small groups, diagnosed, we are working on the protocols there. Will I be sending high school students a survey to get their opinions on the options? I can speak to Ms. St. Kerr on that and see where she falls. Per CDC and IED recommendations, we are often exposed to work unless we are developed symptoms or mandated self-report. Why do we have different guidelines for our children? Not sure. If some students are going to school full-time and others are hybrid model, how will learning across both groups look academically? Like what is being taught? If some are going full-time and others are hybrid, there will not be a full-time or hybrid. It's either hybrid or it's full-time. So I guess that's sort of to answer that question. If it's full-time, that means everybody's back. If it's hybrid, it means we can't have everybody back. Yes, Miss Melissa will have the EDP. What about looking at one subject per day? We are looking at all these options. And again, stay tuned. I know you want answers to these things, but block scheduling, I mean, block scheduling is just this, right? So you have 1 or 2, maybe 3 subjects a day at most. So you have limited passing time, contamination, et cetera. That is absolutely being considered as part of a hybrid program. The process is it's due on August 10th, and we will be presenting, models to the school committee. Will there ultimately be one model? There will be a model and then the option not to send kids and just do remote. So if that means an option, yes, there will be varying models, but it will only be one of 2. If we put in surveys hybrid now, but feel uncomfortable closer to school opening and want to stay 100% remote, will that be an option? We will have to have a deadline at some point saying which one are you going to choose, so we can plan for it. Will there be a graduation? I don't know. That's a long ways away. I'm still worried about graduation for 2020 on August 2nd, and making sure that occurs. You're welcome. Field trips, sports, and other activities canceled. How do you maintain morale? It's a great question. This is something that concerns us greatly. I think the social emotional impact that COVID is having on our students and our families is quite significant. Many of us need those extracurricular activities to work through COVID and to work through the concerns. So, but again, it's all about health and caution and making sure we're doing the right things. We don't control certain things like sports and outdoor activities. Those are controlled by outside organizations, and we have to follow their lead. Yes, Mendez is an older building. How are you going to handle ventilation appropriately? This has not been appropriately answered yet. Again, we're going through all of our HV. It's an older building, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have ventilation. We put in new boiler systems recently. We've gone through and looked at the ventilation systems and are working to ensure that they are working appropriately and that there is proper air exchange. So just because it's older doesn't mean it doesn't have some of those things. It might also mean that some of the rooms that we're using don't have it, and we have to adjust and move kids and teachers into specific areas, and that may limit, again, the number of kids we have in the building at one time. Again, there's no plan for any testing of students at this point in time, or teachers. Yes, I think we can absolutely work towards the storing of recorded lessons. I think it's much needed, and it's easier for kids to go back and review. Neither. If you're opting for 100% remote learning, how would high school students be able to perform lab experiments in community service? Good questions, and we'll have to work through each of those individual cases with the high school folks and the counseling staff. How can I send if her health is guaranteed? If this is the case, are you sending tutors for them? No. I don't anticipate that we'll be sending tutors to homes. We have to make sure that what we're offering, if you're uncomfortable and you have to go remote, then we can have that conversation. We relax. Yes, correct. If students are struggling with remote learning, whether we go hybrid or full remote, how will grading work for students to move them to the next level? Again, if it's hybrid, you can anticipate those students will be in school as well. So there will be contact, there will be grading, there will be feedback, there will be supports in class during those times. A hybrid is not going to be just remote. There's going to be in-person learning going on. You're welcome. How will kids know when if a hybrid model is chosen? It allows the option, if you ask me. Understood. Again, I don't think there's going to be an option that works well for every single family. I can't stress it enough. And August 10th is when we'll be submitting our options to the state. So it'd be good if they could go together for in-person. Understood. We're working towards making sure siblings go together. Can you please let us know what % of parents who answered their preferences and parents who did not answer? Yeah, I said before, we got about 60% of the families who responded. Is this your personal opinion? I don't know what you're referring to at 725, because I was reading stuff. There's no recommendation between face mask and shield. That's what we've asked the Commissioner of Education to look at. Okay, I will save this for later. Correct, siblings can be on the same bus seat. And that is something we're looking at as well. So then you could, again, as we organize the bus routes, making sure if there are siblings, then we pull them together and there's less, you can have more kids on the bus. Absolutely, yep. Okay, we already went through this. Oh yeah, so Courtney, I did mention this. So again, I could just look at the timestamp, I guess. We're at the beginning. Yes. The virtual free academy families can access. That's what I'm working on, as there are certainly a significant number of families who are saying they want only remote. So I am working on a National Public Schools virtual academy. If school meets all in person, will there be an opportunity for after school programs and clubs? Again, we are going to play this by ear and determine what clubs and activities can exist. When will we know for sure the 3 proposed students? August 10th. Will you figure out how many families plan to keep their kids home before making recommendations to the state? for example, 30% plan to homeschool, then the planned number of kids in the class is less, and the possibility of full-time school becomes a little more viable. Yeah, I can tell you I've asked twice thus far, and it's been consistent at 10% of homeschool. But I certainly will be doing it one more time. Yes. But like I said, I think this is actually a lower response rate on this survey than there was on the last survey. This is 1,300 families. I had over almost 2,000 in the last one. And this is 11%, 11.7%, 12%. And the rest was, it was 10% on the last one. Absolute numbers 1375. Well, no, there's not a voting process. If infectious disease approves us 3 feet in the hospital for 8 hours or more, encounter a variety of patients, why are you against their recommendations? Again, I just don't think it's appropriate to have 30 kids 3 feet apart in the classroom with a teacher. If one chooses a fully remote option and then a vaccine is implemented or public health, would you consider which to send your child to school? Could this be? Absolutely. Yep. Yes, I mentioned we are looking at outdoor teaching spaces in classrooms. Is a hybrid model, will there be a consistent standard for instruction? Yes. For all outdoor comments, remember when the kids couldn't go on the playground because of EEE? Yes, and the first cases of EEE have already been identified, and we're actually worried about that as well. If decisions are made regarding the various places determined by August 10, will you share them as they are made, or will you wait until August 10 to disclose them? No, my goal is actually to have them out to the community before August 10th. That's the deadline that has to be submitted to the state. Again, it'll be work that we are, work that we're doing now, but we hope to have a plan well before the August 10th deadline. I'm just using that as the line that we have to have it ready to be submitted to the state. I don't know about insurance covering it for testing. You're welcome. No, I would not worry about how colleges are interpreting grades and transcripts. And again, if you have specific questions on that, please reach out to Ms. St. Kerr at the high school. But we've been in contact with colleges and universities, and they're quite comfortable with how our transcripts will be viewed. Random COVID testing. Again, I don't know if that's a Board of Health initiative or a state initiative. It's certainly not something the schools are in charge of. If forced to use remote learning, can we request a tax reduction? You'd have to ask the town manager. Some other countries implemented a model where all younger kids attended school full-time and other kids proceeded with remote learning. Yep. That allows for proper distancing between younger kids utilizing the space. Older kids have mental capacity. Agreed, Lucy, and those are things that we are discussing for sure. We are analyzing, first and foremost, Brian, all of our systems to determine what needs to change, if anything, based on the guidelines that our facilities manager is receiving. The next survey suggesting parents using the transport use school bus to plan the 6 feet distance. Are parents within 2 mile radius ready to pay the bus fee to help meet they are paying the bus fees. I mean, those families are paying already. So we are charging families outside of what we're required to do. what other districts are doing is saying we're not going to charge and we're not going to transport either. If someone has twins, can be placed together in class? That's absolutely something we'll be considering. We have a policy about twins as well in the school committee and in what parents' rights are. No, I hope to have it out before August 10th. Whoever is rating anonymously and being rude, please stop. We're trying to be productive. Okay. Is there going to be any type of kindergarten screening that would have occurred in May? Great question, and one where Mr. Regan will be in touch with families on that. I just put a note to remind myself to ask him that. He was on vacation this week. You keep saying you hope parents will keep kids home if they're feverish or showing. This isn't happening now. What makes you think? Again, I can't control that. I just hope that folks are thoughtful and considerate. That's all. I'm just expressing my hopes and desire. And I know hope is not a strategy, but I will make sure that I keep my own 2 kids home when they're not feeling well. You're welcome, Mark. No worries. Okay. You're welcome. Okay, it looks like we're finalized. All the questions have been answered. That being said, I'm going to wrap it up and say the following. Again, I want to stress that the decisions that we make or that we suggest or we recommend will be done so considering the information we're provided at the state level, the local level, and in concert with the health recommendations, the negotiations with our unions, the work with other superintendents and other school districts that they're doing to ensure that we are providing a safe and healthy environment for our students and families. It will not please everyone. I understand that. There's no one who's, more willing to sit here in front of you and say, I just don't have all the answers. Sometimes we're making decisions that we don't have, even know some of the questions that are going to be asked. We're doing the best we can, and we will continue to do the best we can for your children and for my staff and my teachers and my custodial staff, my nursing staff, my nutrition staff. I have 400 employees across the district that I'm also responsible for, that I am going to be thoughtful about. And while I understand I'm a taxpayer as well, and I pay the teachers in my district, and I still want to be thoughtful of their health and considerations to them. And that's what I think good employers do, and employees appreciate that. But more importantly, I'm not going to put your kids at risk, and nor should we consider that. We will take the best guidance we can and make the best decisions we can, and hope that that when we need to pivot, we can pivot, and that we're more flexible and adaptable than we've been in the past. I know people thought we were nuts closing down in March, but I certainly can look back and say, I think that was a pretty good decision. I don't necessarily think the educational component and how we did it was overwhelmingly stellar. I'll admit that, but I certainly think the decisions we made in terms of how we closed, and that was the right decision in terms of the school system. So thank you very much. I will certainly be hosting another 1 or 2 of these forums. I will look into Kathy Silva for the ASHPAC, and please be on the lookout for another survey or 2 coming your way, especially with regard to different models, hybrid models, and or which might just be a separate 1 question or 2 question survey in the next week, so we can start looking at those types of models at grade levels. Okay, thank you. Good night, and I do appreciate you taking the time to show up and offer your thoughts and questions.